Before kings were crowned, before prophets spoke, there was a woman whose name the world tried to erase. Her story began not with glory, but with betrayal, promise broken, a life condemned. She was called cursed. She was cast aside. But in the shadows where men forgot her, heaven was watching. Because sometimes justice hides behind a veil. Sometimes destiny wears the face of disgrace. And sometimes the very hands men try to burn carry the flame that will light generations. This is the tale of Tamar, the widow who faced humiliation, the stranger who defied silence, the woman through whom the line of kings would rise. What if righteousness looked nothing like what you expected? What if the scandal the world condemned was the very plan God wrote? Stay with me till the end of this story, and you'll see how one woman's courage rewrote the bloodline of salvation itself. Subscribe and step into a story where disgrace becomes destiny, and destiny becomes divine. Tamar's eyes lowered as the wedding drums faded into silence. She was beautiful, but her beauty was veiled with uncertainty. Judah's eldest son, Er, stood beside her, proud, handsome, but distant. His gaze held no warmth, only pride. He was the son of a patriarch, heir to Judah's line, yet his heart was far from reverence. Tamar came from Canaan's soil, raised to honor her vows. Yet the house she entered was divided between faith and rebellion. Judah, once a leader among his brothers, now lived apart from them, away from the covenant's shadow. His sons mirrored his distance, strong in stature, weak in spirit. At first, Tamar tried to please her husband, but the nights grew cold. Er's heart had been darkened by arrogance and lust. He mocked the ways of his father's God and treated Tamar as a burden. Judah turned his eyes away, pretending not to see. Then came the silence that only death leaves behind. Er's life was cut short, not by sword or sickness, but by divine judgment. The whispers spread through the camp. The Lord struck him down. Tamar was left a widow, not even a mother, only a shadow of a promise unfulfilled. According to custom, Judah called his second son, Onan. "Go in to your brother's wife," he commanded, "and raise up offspring for your brother." Onan obeyed, but only in pretense. He took Tamar, but his intention was selfish. He wanted the pleasure, not the responsibility. If she bore a child, it would not be his heir. He used her, then betrayed her. Tamar's heart broke again. She had not asked for desire, only for dignity. But the same justice that fell upon Er fell upon Onan. He too was struck down, and Judah's house was visited by fear. 2 sons gone, 1 woman left behind, and Judah's mind turned not to righteousness but to suspicion. "Perhaps she is cursed," he whispered to his wife. "If I give her my youngest, he too may die." And so, Judah deceived Tamar with kind words and hollow promises. "Return to your father's house," he said, "and wait until my son Shelah grows up." She bowed her head. She waited, but deep within she knew Judah never meant to keep his word. Days turned into months, months into years. Tamar sat by the doorway of her father's home, her hands still bearing the bangles of widowhood. Every passing caravan reminded her of promises made and forgotten. Judah's youngest son grew tall, a man now, but no messenger came. No robe of marriage was sent. Tamar's patience began to ache like an old wound. The world whispered cruel things. "Twice a widow," they said. "Cursed woman." But Tamar's silence was not surrender. Within her quietness was calculation, not born from vengeance, but from a sense of divine justice. She had honored her vows. She had obeyed the law. Yet she was cast aside as though her worth had died with Judah's sons. And she began to ask questions in her heart. Is there no justice for the righteous? Does the law protect only men? Does God see the woman left waiting in the dust? Those questions became the seed of her destiny. One morning, Tamar heard that Judah was traveling to Timnah to shear his sheep. The timing felt divine. Her heart trembled, not with fear, but with awakening purpose. She removed her widow's garments, the symbols of forgotten promises, and covered herself with a veil. No one recognized her as she walked to the gate that led to Timnah. Judah saw her sitting by the road and thought she was a prostitute. His own eyes were blind to the truth before him. Desire clouded judgment. He approached and offered her his seal, cord, and staff as pledge. Tamar spoke few words. She had seen the cruelty of men's speech before. Now her silence was her weapon. They met under the cover of shadows. When Judah left, he did not know he had sealed his own judgment. Days later, Tamar returned home and put on her widow's clothes once more, but this time with a calm that came from certainty. She carried within her the evidence of a divine reversal. 3 months passed, and Tamar's secret could no longer be hidden. Her belly began to swell. Word reached Judah. "Your daughter-in-law has played the harlot. She is with child by whoredom." Judah's face hardened. "Bring her out," he said coldly. "Let her be burned." Tamar was dragged into the open, her veil gone, her dignity stripped before the eyes of men. Yet even then, she did not plead. She did not curse. She reached into her garments and drew forth the seal, the cord, and the staff. The crowd murmured. Judah froze. "By the man to whom these belong," Tamar said, "I am with child." Time itself seemed to stop. Judah's eyes fell upon his own insignia, the very symbols of his name, his authority, his lineage. The words escaped his mouth like a confession from the soul. "She is more righteous than I." In that moment, shame bowed before truth. The crowd fell silent. Tamar was spared, not by the mercy of men, but by the justice of God. The fire that was meant to destroy her became the light that exposed hypocrisy. Her silence spoke louder than any man's judgment. And though her name had been whispered in shame, heaven had already written it in the lineage of kings. The night after Tamar's deliverance was heavy with silence. Judah sat alone beneath a dim lamp, the same seal and staff that once marked his pride now lying before him as witnesses of his failure. His sons were gone. His honor was cracked. And in his heart burned the memory of the woman he condemned, the woman who had exposed his deceit. Tamar, meanwhile, rested in her father's house. Her hands caressed her growing belly. She knew this was not vengeance. It was vindication. The God who sees the oppressed had written her story in a way that even Judah could not erase. Yet she also knew that the road ahead was not free of judgment. Though Judah had spared her life, the whispers would remain and her future children would bear both promise and reproach. Days became weeks, and Judah's conscience battled his pride. The oath he made to give his son Shelah to Tamar now lay shattered, but the memory of her courage haunted him. He realized the irony. He had accused her of sin, yet she had acted to preserve the very lineage he neglected. Tamar's pregnancy advanced beneath the watchful eyes of her village. Some mocked her, others feared her, yet her composure never faltered. Each sunrise, she whispered a prayer, not for vengeance, but for justice to be complete. Judah avoided her. He sent provisions but not words. The thought of facing her stirred guilt too deep to bear. Yet each night, as he lay in his tent, her image returned, veiled, silent, resolute. One evening Shelah, now a young man, approached his father. "Father," he said, "the woman you promised me, is she still bound by your word?" Judah's jaw tightened. "It is not for you to ask," he replied. But Shelah pressed on. "Then why does her name still trouble you? You speak her name in your sleep." Judah rose abruptly and left the tent. But his son's words pierced deeper than he admitted. His deceit had not merely wounded Tamar. It had corrupted his household. That night, Judah took his seal and cord once more. He held them close and whispered, "May God forgive me for breaking what I swore." When Tamar's time came, her pains were strong and sudden. Women gathered around her, whispering prayers as the lamps flickered. The night was long, and thunder rolled beyond the hills. At dawn, a cry echoed. Not one, but two. The midwife gasped. "There are twins," she exclaimed. One child thrust his hand out first, and the midwife tied a scarlet thread around his wrist. "This one came first," she said. But suddenly the hand withdrew, and the other child emerged before him. The women looked at one another in awe. "What a breach you have made for yourself," the midwife cried. "Therefore his name shall be Perez." The second followed, wearing the scarlet thread, and they called him Zerah. Tamar, exhausted, looked upon them with tears of triumph. Two sons, a double portion from a woman once condemned. It was not just childbirth. It was a rebirth of destiny. Far away, Judah heard the news. At first, he remained silent. Then he whispered, "The hand of the Lord is in this." He knew that through Tamar, the line he almost destroyed had been restored. Months later, Judah journeyed once more through the lands near Timnah. Time had aged him. His beard had grown gray, his eyes softer. He stopped near the road where he once met the veiled woman, the place of his humiliation and awakening. There he saw Tamar carrying her sons. Perez clutched her hand, and Zerah slept upon her shoulder. Judah dismounted and approached her. Tamar turned, her eyes calm. She said nothing. Judah bowed slightly. "You need not fear me," he said quietly. "The Lord has shown me that his righteousness stands above my shame. You have done what I should have done. Preserved my line, my name, my covenant." Tamar's lips trembled. "Then keep your word," she said. "Let these sons bear your name." Judah nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "From this day," he declared, "Perez and Zerah shall be called sons of Judah." And so it was. What began in deception ended in restoration. A woman's courage had redeemed a family's broken vow. Years passed, and Tamar's story became legend. Her sons grew strong. Her name whispered among women who suffered in silence. They said, "She is the one who defied shame and was blessed." Judah grew old, and as he neared death, he called for his family. Around him stood his sons and grandsons, and among them the sons of Tamar. He placed his hands upon their heads and said, "The Lord's promise lives through you." Perez would go on to father generations that led to kings, and one day to the Messiah himself. But Tamar's heart was not filled with pride. It was filled with peace. She had not sought greatness, only justice. She had not spoken vengeance, only truth. And though many had judged her, heaven had written her name among the righteous. The oath that Judah broke had become the covenant Tamar fulfilled. Her silence was not weakness. It was wisdom. Her courage was not rebellion. It was righteousness. And her story, once whispered in shame, would echo through eternity as the tale of a woman who turned disgrace into destiny. Tamar remembered the day she first returned to her father's house. Bracelets muted, hair tied in widow's knots, the taste of dust and judgment heavy on her tongue. In those days, the world arranged itself against her. Law on one side, whispers on the other, until both felt like a blade pressed to her throat. Yet beneath the stillness, a decision germinated, quiet as a root-splitting stone. The law had given her a path. She was owed a future in Judah's house. But men, not law, had turned her into ash. Judah had spoken promises like smoke, seen for a moment, gone in the wind. Shelah had grown. No hand was offered. Tamar learned how to breathe in a house where expectation starved. Her father spoke kindly, but she felt the rooms narrowing, the days thinning into threads. She watched other women go to market with children on their hips, laughter shared like bread. She turned her face away and taught herself not to ache. When her reflection startled her, eyes older than her years, she would whisper, "God sees." Then she would whisper again, as if saying it twice stitched the words deeper into the cloth of her soul. News traveled along the roads like birds along a river. Judah would be going up to Timnah for the shearing. Men, she knew, became simpler when profit was near and wine was ready. That was when resolve, long ripening, fell like fruit into her hands. It was not vengeance. It was the righteous rethreading of a dropped cord. She took her widow's shawl and folded it with care. She set aside the bangles that rang of grief. From a cedar box she drew a veil, plain but well woven, the kind that turned a woman's face into a suggestion, a presence, a possibility. She held it to the light and saw the world soften through it, like truth hidden in parable. She wound it, steady-fingered, around her hair and brow. When she stood, the mirror returned a woman unclaimed by anyone's pity. The plan did not roar. It breathed. If men closed doors, God could open a road. She would walk it. The road to Timnah rose in long, dry ribs. Travelers passed, eyes skimming, looking for profit and pleasure in equal measure. Tamar sat near the turn, shawl drawn close, veil quiet as a pressed finger. She was not a painted lure. She was a question placed in Judah's path. Judah came with a companion, laughter in his breath, the kind of laughter that hides the dregs of remembered shame. He saw her, saw what he wanted to see, and desire made him foolish. Desire had a habit of pushing men into pits they had dug with their own hands. "What will you take?" he asked, voice purring with the casual certainty of a man who expects the world to bend. Tamar let silence do its work. She had learned that silence, at the right time, made men tell on themselves. "A kid from the flock," Judah added. He sounded generous, as men do when their generosity costs them nothing today. "Leave a pledge," she said, soft, even, a thin blade of sound. He shifted, surprised by the firmness beneath the veil. "What pledge?" he asked. "Your seal," she replied. "Your cord and your staff." He hesitated. These were not coins or trinkets. These were identity and authority. The signet that stamped his name into wax, the cord that marked his person, the staff that walked before him like a herald. For a heartbeat, a shadow of prudence crossed his face. Then want returned, and want had long been the master to which he bowed. He put them in her hand. The weight was honest, solid. Power, for once, resting where power had never thought to rest. She tucked them away in measured calm, not because she feared, but because she knew the story had a spine now. She knew it would stand. He moved toward her with a hunger that pretended to be right and right. She endured what was necessary, mind fixed on a justice older than any man's convenience. When he rose, he felt larger. She felt anchored. He left with his laughter again, but it sounded thinner now, like a worn string on a harp. After, his friend returned with the promised kid and empty hands. "No such woman," the men of the place said. "We've seen no temple harlot here." Judah mumbled, embarrassed. "Let her keep the pledge," he said. "We'll avoid ridicule." Pride rescued him from exposure for a while. Pride always does, right up to the cliff's edge. Tamar walked home as the sky cooled. She folded the veil away, took up her widow's shawl again, and waited. Waiting, but no longer as a beggar at the gates of another's kindness. Waiting as a steward of proof. When the swelling showed, it announced itself to strangers before it announced itself to friends. The village carried the news to Judah the way dry thorns carry flame. Fast, eager, crackling with delight. "Your daughter-in-law has played the harlot," they said. "She is with child." Judah's mouth formed judgment before his heart formed thought. "Bring her out," he ordered. "Let her be burned." Fire is what men call for when they want their own shame to vanish in smoke. They dragged her to the open square, dust and scorn rising together. Tamar stood still, not in defiance, not in fear, but in a composure that made the crowd feel overdressed in its certainty. She reached into her garment and drew out the 3 witnesses no man could bully. "Seal," cord, staff. The square quieted. Even cruelty loves ceremony. She looked at Judah, not with hatred, not even with triumph, but with a calm that invites truth to sit down and eat. By the man to whom these belong, she said, I am with child. A pause. Then the kind of silence that does not simply hush sound but rearranges a man's life. Judah saw his name impressed on the signet. He saw his cord, his staff. He saw himself, his want, his evasion, his easy words, his broken promise, lit up like clay under a kiln's mouth. She is more righteous than I, he said. He did not excuse. He did not revise the past into better angles. He lowered the hand he had raised against her and, for once, lifted honor instead. He commanded the fire to return to its lamp, the stones to return to the earth. The crowd melted into corners, where people go when truth sends them there. Tamar did not bow. She remained upright, not proud, not small, simply whole. Fire would not be fed that day. Something brighter had arrived. Months later, the midwife's shout called women from their chores and men from their gates. The room thrummed with urgency. Tamar labored with the focus of a soldier at the breach. When the first small hand pushed through, the midwife tied it with scarlet, a ribbon of claim. Then the hand slipped back, stubborn as destiny is, and the brother surged forward, crying at the air as if announcing himself to the generations already listening. What a breach you have made! The midwife laughed, half scandalized, half blessed. Perez, they named him Breakthrough. Zerah followed, the scarlet bright on his wrist, a memory knotted in thread. 2 sons. Where a future had been padlocked, it now swung wide. Judah came to the doorway with careful steps. He looked older than the last time he had looked properly at anything. He did not enter uninvited. He did not speak first. He stood like a man at a threshold both literal and moral. Tamar lifted Perez, then Zerah, and the boys' faces, still clouded with the fog of first breaths, turned toward the light like small moons. Judah's voice wore humility like a garment that finally fit. They are my sons, he said, the sons of Judah. He did not say it to claim them from Tamar. He said it to return to her what had always been due. He left his seal, cord, and staff not as hostages now, but as honors returned in deed rather than trinket. Word moved again through the fields and tents. The story changed texture in retelling. From scandal to proverb, from shame to testimony. Women spoke Tamar's name at wells and found their backs a little straighter. Men told their sons what a vow meant and what it cost to break one. A line was mended. Somewhere beyond sight, heaven wrote a note in the margins of kings. Years afterward, Tamar walked through the market with a dignity that did not need to be displayed to be seen. Perez ran before her, pushing past baskets, laughing like a stone rolling downhill. Zerah trailed with thoughtful eyes, the scarlet thread sometimes tied to his wrist as a game, sometimes kept in a small pouch, as if he knew he was carrying a footnote for the future. Shelah, grown and broad-shouldered, once passed her at the well. He paused, unsure of his place in the story that should have been his to honor earlier. He said, "Peace be to you." It was a start. Tamar nodded. Mercy does not always shake hands with reconciliation, but it knows how to bow without breaking. Judah aged into a quiet repentance. He did not flinch when people said Tamar's name. He spoke it first with gratitude. Before his death, he assembled his sons and spoke of scepters and rulers, of lines and futures. He looked at Perez with a gaze that measured beyond the boy's small shoulders into halls yet unbuilt, thrones yet uncarved, a birth in a town that did not exist on any map they owned. He blessed the sons of Tamar and folded his hands, not as a man finished with regret, but as a man finished with lying to himself. In another age, scholars would unroll genealogies like carpets and trace the threads with fingers stained by ink and time. They would pause where few expected them to, at the woman named between fathers and sons. Tamar, not erased by the line, but stitched into it so clearly that even speed readers had to slow down. She did not smuggle herself into history. She was written in, her name shining like a seal pressed into wax. Somewhere, a girl wronged by custom would hear the tale and hold it like flint in her pocket. Somewhere, a man tempted to make easy promises would remember a staff and a cord and a signet placed in the wrong hands for the right reason. Somewhere, a judge would lower his voice, hearing again the sentence that corrected judgment without softening it. She is more righteous than I. Tamar aged beautifully, the kind of beauty that sits beneath the skin like a well in dry country. She taught Perez to walk not only across fields but through doors that open because someone dared to push. She taught Zerah the difference between first and right, between thread and truth. When she laughed, women joined her. When she fell quiet, men learned to listen. At the end of her days, people asked her what she wanted remembered. She smiled because the question misunderstood the nature of remembrance. "What's written is enough," she might have said. Or perhaps she said nothing at all, knowing that the truest testimonies are the lives growing from the seeds we bury in courage. The veil she once wore lay folded in a cedar box. It smelled faintly of a road at dusk. Some would say the veil was her cleverness. Others, her scandal. She would have said it was a tool like a door or a lamp or a sling. What mattered was not the cloth but the truth it served. In time, singers composed lines in which her name kept time with kings. Scribes copied those lines slowly, careful not to smudge the letters, as if even the ink knew it was touching something weight-bearing. And when the lineage reached the moment history tilts on its axis, a child swaddled in a feeding trough, a mother's hands, a carpenter's quiet strength. Tamar's name was there, steady as a beam in the roof. A woman wronged, a woman steadfast, a woman who made a plan that mended what men had torn. Not vengeance, not vanity, a veiled plan unveiled in light, and through that light the path of a dynasty. Years had passed since the dust of Tamar's trial had settled, yet Judah carried the memory like a scar inside his chest. Each time he looked upon his sons, Perez with his bold eyes and restless will, Zerah with his gentleness and quiet thought, he saw not shame but salvation. He once thought himself the keeper of legacy, the name through which greatness would come. Yet it was Tamar who had preserved that name when he was too blinded by pride to see its worth. At times he wondered why God had chosen her, a woman wronged, an outsider by birth, a widow twice over. But the longer he lived, the clearer it became. The Lord's favor was not a crown of bloodlines, but a flame that burned where justice was needed most. Tamar's courage had saved his line. Her silence had judged his deceit. And now, her sons were growing into men who bore the fire of destiny within them. In the evenings, Judah would sit outside his tent, the staff that once served as his shame now leaning beside him like a relic of redemption. Perez and Zerah would play before him, wrestling in the dust, their laughter echoing against the hills. He smiled, though the smile carried both joy and sorrow. "They carry my blood," he whispered, "but her spirit guides them." And for the first time in years, Judah felt something that resembled peace. The season of shearing returned again, that time of noise, laughter, and abundance. Judah, older and humbler now, walked among his men not as a lord but as a father of a redeemed house. His name, once whispered in ridicule, was now spoken with quiet respect. As the evening fires burned low, Judah called his household together. Tamar arrived last, her sons walking beside her. She no longer wore the garments of mourning. Her robe was simple, linen white, bound with a scarlet sash, the same color that once marked Zerah's wrist, a sign that destiny cannot be hidden forever. Judah stood slowly, leaning on his staff. The crowd fell silent. "I called you all," he said, "not to boast but to remember." His voice cracked slightly, the weight of years pressing through it. "When I turned my eyes from righteousness, This woman stood in its place. When I broke my oath, she kept the covenant I forgot. Through her, our house did not fall into darkness. He turned toward Tamar, and his words softened. You, who were once condemned, have become my honor. You, who were cast aside, are now the mother of my line. The crowd murmured in awe. Some bowed their heads. Others stared, unsure how to measure the sight of a man honoring a woman he once condemned. Tamar bowed slightly, her face calm. The Lord does not forget the forgotten, she said. He only waits for the day when truth reveals itself. And Judah answered, Then let today be that day. In the weeks that followed, elders from nearby tribes came to Judah's camp. They had heard of the story, of the widow who stood against injustice and the patriarch who confessed his guilt before all. In a world ruled by silence and male pride, such confession was a song unheard of. They came not to judge but to witness. Judah met them at the gate, his head unbowed, his voice clear. She is more righteous than I, he said again, though no one had demanded it. One elder, old and gray, leaned forward. Do you not fear that your sons will carry her reproach? Judah shook his head. They will carry her righteousness. And if the Lord has chosen that their blood will lead to kings, then let it be known. The throne of Israel shall have the courage of their mother. The elders sat in silence. Some nodded slowly, realizing they were witnessing a moment larger than pride or tradition. Others whispered among themselves that perhaps this was how God chose his vessels, not through perfection, but through repentance. When the council departed, Judah returned home. He found Tamar in the courtyard, teaching Perez how to bind a bundle of wheat. The boy was impatient. The stalks slipped through his fingers. Judah smiled faintly and said, He has my strength, but your patience. Tamar looked up, her expression gentle. Then perhaps he will grow wiser than both of us. They laughed softly. Two souls once divided by judgment, now bound by grace. Time, relentless as it is, brought gray to Judah's beard and calm to his heart. He felt the years in his bones, but the peace within him grew stronger. One night, as the moon hung over the camp like a silent witness, he called for Tamar. When she entered, the firelight caught her face. Serene, timeless, still beautiful. He looked at her long, as one looks upon a reflection of their life's lesson. I have lived many years, he said. I was the one who sold my brother Joseph into slavery, who turned my eyes from my own sin, who broke my word. And yet, when I deserved ruin, God gave me you. Tamar stood quietly. You were not given me, she said softly. We were given a chance to see what justice looks like when it wears mercy's face. Judah smiled faintly. Then may my sons remember your face more than mine. He took from his chest the old seal, once the symbol of his authority, now tarnished with age. He placed it in her hands. Keep this, he said, for it was through you that this house found its name again. Tamar looked at the seal, the very token that had once condemned and redeemed her, and tears filled her eyes. She bowed her head, but Judah lifted her chin gently. No shame, he whispered. Not anymore. And for the first time, Tamar allowed herself to weep, not for loss, but for peace finally earned. Years after Judah's passing, Tamar sat at the doorway of her home, the laughter of her grandchildren echoing around her. Perez had become a leader among the people, wise, strong, and fair. Zerah served as his counselor, his scarlet thread memory always close. Whenever strangers came to the village and asked who she was, the people would say, "That is Tamar, the woman who faced fire and walked away with light." She would smile faintly at such words, though she knew her story was not hers alone. It was the story of every soul who was judged before being understood, every promise broken that heaven restored, every secret shame turned into holy redemption. In her final days, she asked that the old veil be buried with her. "It was my disguise once," she said. But also my shield. It hid me from the eyes of the proud and revealed me to the eyes of truth. When she passed, the women of the village wept not only for her, but for the strength she had shown them, and the men bowed their heads, whispering the words Judah had spoken long ago. She is more righteous than I. Generations would rise and fall. Kingdoms would come and crumble. And yet, when the scrolls of lineage were read aloud centuries later, tracing the path from Judah to David, and from David to the Messiah, her name remained. Tamar, the woman who turned disgrace into destiny. The woman whose silence thundered louder than any man's judgment. The woman through whom God reminded the world that justice, once veiled, will always find its light. Years passed, and the desert winds shifted with time's quiet hand. Tamar's sons, Perez and Zerah, grew into men whose lives became living echoes of their mother's courage. Perez, the firstborn by divine interruption, carried the strength of his father Judah and the righteousness of his mother Tamar. He built altars where others built pride. He fought battles of fairness, not just of swords. Zerah, the one marked by the scarlet thread, carried remembrance like a covenant. His wisdom was deep, his words slow and heavy with thought. They were opposites, one a storm, one a river, yet both flowed from the same well of justice their mother had dug with patience and faith. When Tamar's body returned to the earth, Judah's tribe gathered in silence. Perez stood beside her grave, the seal and cord of Judah resting in his hands. He spoke softly, though his voice trembled with reverence. My mother walked through fire and came out light. My father stumbled in shame and rose in truth. We are their sons, and through us, their story will live as long as the earth holds breath. Zerah, beside him, added, the world forgets names, but heaven does not. The righteous are not written in dust, but in destiny. And the people bowed, for they knew this was not the end of a family, but the beginning of a lineage chosen by divine design. Generations rolled forward like waves on an endless shore. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. The house of Judah flourished among the tribes, their tents multiplying, their voices carrying the songs of both sorrow and hope. From Ram came Amminadab, whose daughter would one day marry into the house of priests. And from him came Nahshon, a leader among the tribes of Israel during the wilderness years, a man who walked behind Moses, bearing the banner of Judah before the Ark of the Covenant. Each generation carried a whisper of Tamar's defiance, a shadow of her strength. Women of Judah told her story by firelight, not as scandal, but as scripture of endurance. She is the root, they would say. Without her, the tree would have withered. The men repeated Judah's words in reverence. She is more righteous than I. And fathers told sons that righteousness was not inherited through power, but through courage, through the kind of faith that refuses to be buried beneath the shame of others. As the years folded into centuries, her bloodline became the spine of prophecy. From the ashes of humiliation rose the rhythm of kings. Generations later, from the womb of Tamar's descendants came a shepherd, small, unnoticed, with hands roughened by the fields and eyes that saw heaven in the stars. His name was David, son of Jesse, a direct descendant of Perez. When the prophet Samuel came seeking a king, it was David who stood last, forgotten among his brothers, just as Tamar had been forgotten among Judah's promises. Yet heaven remembered what the world overlooked. Samuel's horn poured oil upon David's head, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. The boy from Bethlehem became a warrior, a poet, and eventually the king of Israel. But more than that, he was the fulfillment of a story that began generations earlier with a woman who refused to bow to shame. In David's victories, Tamar's courage marched again. In David's psalms, her endurance sang again. And in David's repentance, Judah's confession breathed again. Even the ark carried her echo, for where justice and mercy met, Tamar's legacy was already written in invisible ink. Centuries turned into dust. Kingdoms rose and fell like tides beneath an eternal sky. The sons of David ruled, faltered, and scattered. Some reigned in wisdom, others in ruin. Yet through all their triumphs and sins, one truth remained untouched. The promise would endure. Even when Babylon's fires consumed Jerusalem and exile tore Judah from its soil, the scrolls still carried her name. Tamar, mother of Perez, ancestor of kings. Scribes, weary from copying genealogies, would sometimes pause when they reached her name. Their ink would dry on the quill, their eyes tracing the curve of her letters. One would whisper, "Strange, among all these men, God kept the name of a woman who once wore a veil." And another would reply, "Because without her, there would be no kings to write about." Even prophets hinted at her legacy without naming her. Isaiah spoke of a root growing from Jesse, a branch that would bear fruit in barren times. That root began with Perez, the breach born of Tamar's faith. And though generations forgot her face, heaven never did. Her courage, sealed in Judah's staff and cord, had become a prophecy wrapped in flesh. The centuries of silence broke with the cry of a child in Bethlehem. The lineage that began in scandal now ended in salvation. In a humble stable, beneath a star that pierced the darkness, Mary gave birth to a son. Jesus, called the Christ, son of David, son of Judah, son of Tamar. The same blood that once defied shame now pulsed through the veins of the Messiah. The same line once cursed by men now carried divine redemption for all mankind. When the gospel writers recorded his ancestry, they listed for women among generations of men. Each had borne reproach, each had stood in defiance of despair. But the first name written, the cornerstone of courage, was Tamar. She who veiled her face so truth could be seen. She who bore twins so that prophecy could have two paths. She who turned deception into destiny. And as angels sang above Bethlehem, her story came full circle. Not in fire, not in scandal, but in glory. Tamar's name, once spoken in whispers, now stood carved into eternity. Her faith had become the bridge between promise and fulfillment. Her womb the gate through which kings and the King of Kings would pass.